Guys, this is not good because reportedly Russians were able to enter Avdiivka. At least 22,000 Z soldiers are approaching from the north, so obviously Ukraine had to switch to the so-called active defense. And to make things even worse, Belarus received nuclear weapons from Russia. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude, and unfortunately this last night yet another pretty big attack of Russia against the territory of Ukraine happened. Most of the objects which were damaged or even destroyed were, as always unfortunately, civilian objects, such as for example residential houses in Kiev, in Kharkiv, and in Dnipropetrovsk region in Pavlovgrad. And whenever Ukrainians were able to find the remains of the warheads of these metallic cylinders, some of them, or I would even say the majority of them, they were stamped with the latest month of 2023, which means that this temporarily ceasefire or absence of mass attacks of Russia against Ukraine was due to the fact that they were building and manufacturing even more metallic cylinders to use them in the future attacks against Ukraine, such as this one. And also looks like Russians did realize that Ukraine have a very big trouble intercepting ballistic and hypersonic missiles, because as of right now the only air defense system capable of doing this is Patriot, which Ukraine does not have that many of them. That is why unfortunately this last night Ukrainians were able to intercept pretty much all cruise missiles, but only 5 out of 12 ballistic missiles and not a single one hypersonic missile called Kinjal. And the worst part about all this, like mentioned previously, is that these attacks were against mostly civilian infrastructure. And the Russian Ministry of Defense even had the audacity to claim that they were using extremely precise metallic cylinders. They were only targeting military targets, and the reason why civilian houses of regular Ukrainians were destroyed, it is because Ukrainians used them to hide military objects, to disguise them as regular residential buildings. I mean, at this point Russian propaganda does not even try to hide that, guys, we just accidentally attacked residential building. Let's just say that this was a military headquarters of Ukrainian mercenaries in disguise. So as you can see, they are no even longer hiding that they are attacking regular civilian buildings. But there was a very unexpected, relatively big fire in Vladivostok, located all the way to the east of Russia, thousands of kilometers behind the front lines. And because of this, several neighborhoods lost light. For this reason, I'm not surprised why Russians were not able to say that these were the attacks by Ukrainians. I mean, yes, it is extremely far behind the front lines, but it is quite understandable why the Russian propaganda did not want to focus on this event that much. And pretty much as always, right after mass attacks against the territory of Ukraine, Russians started to increase their own air defense systems capabilities, such as for example right here, as you can see, they're bringing air defense systems closer to the second major city in Russia, St. Petersburg, because usually after such attacks there is a response by Ukrainians. And speaking about the northern border, according to the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, Belarus recently received nuclear weapons for their Iskander systems from Russia. Alexander Lukashenko basically mentioned that all the security guarantees that Belarus received back in the 90s are completely invalid, nobody's following anymore, nobody's respecting Belarus, everyone wants to capture this land. That is why, just like Russia, Belarus will probably have to defend itself by attacking another country. And according to some Western military experts, however ridiculous it sounds, these nuclear missiles, they can be targeting such countries as Poland. And I truly hope there will be no escalation following another country joining the war on the side of Russia. To be honest, not a single country ever should join this war. The war itself should be over as soon as possible. But in the worst case scenario, something happens, I will obviously keep making those updates to keep you guys in the loop. So if you don't want to miss, if you want to stay updated, please consider subscribing to my channel, liking this video. This helps my work a lot. Thank you guys so much. And so yes, now guys, please allow me to present you a very quick update from the south of Ukraine, and then we're gonna go to the east and talk about 22,000 Russians assembling to the north of the border, and also Russians reportedly entering Avdiivka. And so, back to the south, our first stop brings us to Kherson region, where yet another T-90M Prorif, extremely modern combat battle tank of Russians, has been destroyed with a simple Ukrainian drone. Next we have a video from Krynki, where Russians continue to try and attempt to push Ukrainians back behind Dnipro river on the other side of Kherson region, but Ukrainians are already extremely comfortable on the other side of Kherson region, and they are the ones attacking already the positions of Russians, such as, for example, right here is the compilation of video of Ukrainians using the drones to find, investigate, target and eliminate Russian positions around Krynki. And guys, as always, if you do want to see fully uncensored episodes of the Russian Dude and also show the support to the channel, to my work, please consider checking my Patreon, where you can find hundreds of extra footage I will never, unfortunately, be able to show on YouTube. It is all on my Patreon. The link is down below. There is 1 week of free access for every single one of you to try. Next, as promised, we go to the east of Ukraine, where we can see a trophy military vehicles that Ukrainians were able to seize from Russians, such as, for example, this one armored vehicle called Tiger, and then armored personnel carrier BTR-82A. Next, as we go to Bakhmut front line, a little bit to the south of it, next to Avdiivka, Ukrainians reportedly were able to destroy a tank and an armored vehicle of Russians. And then in Belarus region, right here we are able to see a Russian infantry fighting vehicle trying to approach the Ukrainian positions, and most likely being eliminated on one of its own mines previously laid there by Russians. Next we go to Avdiivka, arguably the most intense combat zone in the entire Ukraine at the moment. And as you can see, Ukrainians continue to destroy military vehicles of Russians pretty much every single day. Such as, for example, right here, the most recent drone footage came to us. You can see the destroyed Russian T-80 tank, T-72 tank, and one of the infantry fighting vehicles of Russians. And speaking about Avdiivka itself, there are reports that Russians were able to enter the city and drive along some of its streets. There was even some very unproven, let's call it like this, footage of Russians driving inside Avdiivka. They were not showing their faces, they were not showing the machine they were using, so the trustworthiness of this video is pretty questionable. But the fact is the fact. A lot of sources, they do confirm that Russians, at least temporarily, were able to enter this city. Now, of course, as you can see from this map, Russians are very far away from completely encircling and capturing this city, but unfortunately, once again, there are first cases of them entering the city center. So let's see how the situation will develop. I will obviously continue following this situation very closely. And ultimately going to Mikilsky, located next to Vuhledar. To the north of this settlement, Ukrainians were able to destroy 2 more Russian tanks. But unfortunately, the most concerning report of the recent days came to us from Serhiy Naev. He is mentioning that according to his intelligence, Russians are concentrating at least around 22,000 soldiers to the northern border with Ukraine. They are constantly sending small diversion units, doing reconnaissance in combat and reconnaissance with the drones, and building fortifications and defense structures. So it does look like they're preparing another offensive to the north of Ukraine. It might not be as significant as the offensive in the east or in the south, and maybe, just maybe, in case it happens, this will serve as pretty much taking away the attention of Ukrainians from other regions of their own country. Pretty much this will be most likely a distraction. There was even a pretty big article by the Financial Times several days ago that they also see tendency of Russians trying to kinda launch a new offensive maybe before the summer of this year, and most likely this will be targeted against the north of the country from the Kiev direction. But they also do mention that the main goal still remains the same, which is the capture of Kharkov, Donetsk, Luhansk regions, Zaporozhye and Kherson to the south. So once again, this is yet another confirmation that most likely if Kiev offensive happens, this once again will be a distraction. But nevertheless, Ukraine has to prepare. That is why, according to already Ukrainian military representatives, they are switching to a so-called active defense. You guys already know that every war is cyclical, one side attacks, one defends, then they switch sides, the first country starts to defend while the second one is attacking. And since it was the Ukrainian offensive, previously counter-offensive, now unfortunately it is the time for Russians. Most likely they will attack from the north to distract and pull some Ukrainian forces to the north of the country to make it less people defending the east and the south, and then we might see some very intense combat activities in those zones. But at the same time, it is not that just like magically Russians will create a couple of extra million soldiers to perform this distraction. Russians, just like Ukrainians, they do have a very significant problems with recruiting people into the army. I would even say even more problems than the Ukrainians have, simply because Ukrainians are defending themselves, so they have a reason to fight for, while Russians, most of them are literally forced into the military. And also, just generally speaking, defending is a little bit more easier than attacking. But unfortunately, the fact is the fact. It is most likely Russians who will be attacking next. Ukrainians will have to protect themselves, and now it is as important as ever for them to be able to do it effectively. The West must continue support to Ukraine, because if this offensive by Russians will be successful, Ukraine unfortunately does look fighting with its last remaining strength. So if they will be able to withstand the next attack, they might change the course of war in their direction. And as always, I will be following daily this war and making those video updates, so if you don't want to miss them, just please consider subscribing to my channel. We're very close to 240,000. Thank you so much, my Patreons, for your support, and see you tomorrow.